Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of you who are joining us from across the world today for another edition of Pandemic Punditry brought to you by the Content Experience Company. We are delighted and honored to have with us Mahi de Silva, co-founder and CEO of Amplify.ai, and John McCrae, CMO of Amplify.ai today. Welcome to Pandemic Punditry, everybody.
Thank you.
John, if let me start with you. I know Mahi's been with us about, 9 months ago, but I'd like to start with you if you don't mind.
Sure.
For the benefit of our viewers and listeners, if you could sort of give us sort of a layperson's definition or description of what conversational AI is, that might sort of help set the stage a little bit.
Sure. Well, believe it or not, we're actually at this juncture of advancement of technology that it is now actually possible for organizations, whether that's consumer brands or political campaigns, or in the case of the Indian government, we're able to now have interactions between software and humans that are actually personalized, one-to-one, conversational, and to drive real results. So it's effectively digital engagement at superhuman scale.
Superhuman scale. Okay, so we're talking about, if you were traditionally using something like a call center or humans on the phone or answering questions you're talking about this sort of amplified by potentially millions if you wanted to.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the really interesting areas where we see this deployed is for brands that get really high engagement on social media, particularly in the form of comments on Facebook and Instagram. Some brands will have a small team of humans try to stay on top of that, either boosting the positive comments or responding to customer problems, or in some cases maybe hiding a brand or a comment that's got hate speech in it. Those kinds of activities are expensive to do, and most brands don't have anyone doing that 24/7. So we're really when we talk about superhuman scale, we're really being able to do this kind of listening and engaging in an effective way with a much, much larger number of, say, comments than would be practicable to do by a human team. And in the case where it makes sense to go from seeing the comment to actually replying to it in a personalized one-to-one way, that's even more resource intensive. But using conversational AI to do that is now quite feasible. One really incredible example of this is we were used by many of the US Democratic political campaigns in order to do voter engagement at superhuman scale. And in the final days of this historic election cycle, our platform was handling over 1 million comments a day, something you could never possibly field a team of volunteers or paid people to even read, let alone read, understand, and reply to in a meaningful way.
So amazing, right? So we're talking about this thing at hyperscale, as you so rightly put. Mahi, I know good to have you back, by the way, on Pandemic Punditry. Since we last spoke, the world has obviously changed quite dramatically. However, I think it's been a great year from what I've been sort of following you on the press and media for you at Amplify AI. What were some of the highlights for you of sort of the past 9 months? Being the co-founder and CEO of Amplify?
So I think when we spoke last, we were talking about using our conversational AI system by various governments, NGOs, organizations that were really trying to educate the public, trying to get them real-time information, and tapping into everything from website chat to social media, even to search, to drive a persistent engagement. But let's say that was back in the April timeframe in 2020. What we've seen as a macro level trend is that as lockdowns happened all over the world, every brand was looking to exploit digital engagement better. So even if you were a small business, a restaurant, you had to have an interactive website. It wasn't just about posting your address and your hours and your menu. It was about how you could place an order, whether it's a pickup or a delivery service. And it brought so many businesses to real world digital interaction, as opposed to the brochureware internet that you could kind of have some presence, but it really wasn't interactive in any substantial way. So we've seen the benefit of that now multiply to every brand across major verticals. When we started 2019, we had some marquee brands on our platform, but we've seen everything from financial services companies that are, trying to provide access to lending, whether it's government sponsored or otherwise. We've seen automotive companies that have really moved to the fact that people are not going to come to their dealerships and test drive their cars. How could they create a virtual experience that was just as compelling? We've seen, consumer packaged goods companies or FMCG products that have really embraced the notion of being able to create a more personalized experience for their customers. What does that lipstick look like on you in an augmented reality experience? Where is the best place to find that eyeliner or that magnetic lashes that are now seem to be taking the internet by storm? And then we just happen to kind of fall into the political dynamic where, here in the United States, there was really a call to action given what was happening in our capital. We were happy to lend a hand in terms of our platform to be used by 17 total campaigns in the United States, from presidential campaigns to Senate and congressional campaigns, even gubernatorial campaigns, and all of the infrastructure that is mechanized to support them. So it was particularly rewarding to see the outcome that we saw, in the White House in terms of Joe Biden, and two very, very important changes in Senate races, in Arizona, in Georgia, here in the U.S., that has basically changed the balance of power. So all in all, despite having kind of a slow start to 2020, we ended the year exceeding our own financial goals and expectations, traction with customers, working with the giants, Facebooks and the Googles of the world, and in general, seeing what we have poured our energy into building the SaaS platform for conversational AI, really see strong adoption around the world.
it's always good to sort of exceed your financial goals and then do some good in the world at the same time. So I actually worked on the first Obama campaign. I was a volunteer fielding those phone calls, and I know how busy all of us were when we were trying to flip Virginia for Obama, which we did. But it was one of those things that, and having been sort of a volunteer in the campaign, I can just imagine what your technology would have done at scale. So great work there. Karthika, sorry, I know you have some, I've been monopolizing.
It's all right. John, my question is actually for you. This is specifically, could you tell our audience, please, how Amplify AI was used to win the presidency, flip the Senate and turn one of the key red states blue?
Sure. I'll share that we got our start in the U.S. political market with Kamala Harris. So we actually entered into the U.S. political space in probably May of 2019, going live for Kamala Harris. One of the core techniques was doing automated response to the comments coming in on her or any of our clients' posts, whether paid or organic. So we look at that comment as fuel for our system, a chance to take a public comment and reply to it privately, one-to-one, in a personalized way via Messenger. If the person receiving that comment response replies back, that's the beginning of both a conversation and potentially a long-term conversational relationship. And what we saw in the US political market was on the order of 50 to 60% of people receiving that comment response would lean in and engage. That's really a high response rate for a digital engagement channel. In fact, we've got one client right now who's running for the US Senate who's getting a 78% reply rate. Anyway, that conversation can go in any direction, and at the start of it, we might not know whether the voter is leaning toward our candidate, our client, persuadable, or in clear opposition. But we get that sorted out pretty quickly and take the voter down these various pathways. This was the most expensive election in US history because so much was on the line. So our political clients very much were interested in how we could move the needle for their KPIs of email list building, SMS opt-in list building, and driving grassroots donations. And that core performed remarkably well. And it did so for Senate campaigns, and it did it for the most well-funded presidential campaigns in the primaries, and then for Joe Biden in the general election. So that's really awesome. It helped fuel the key races, Biden, and in the Senate, Mark Kelly, John Hickenlooper, and John Ossoff. But the most interesting work that we did, I think, was what we did for the Biden campaign in the final 4 or 5 weeks of the campaign, in which they had a voter file that had several 100,000 voters believed to be likely to support Joe Biden or be persuadable to support Joe Biden. But these several 100,000 people, they were unable to reach them because they either didn't know the phone number, or when they attempted to reach them by sending a volunteer door knocking, they failed. And so they recognized that we could probably help them with that through conversational AI engagements. And we did that through an ad campaign leveraging Facebook's click to messenger conversational ad unit. And in the last few weeks before the historic outcome, we managed to get to 247,000 voters in 14 battleground states and have them in deep conversation with Joe Biden's AI. And of those who were supportive, which was the vast majority, we were able to help them make a voting plan based on an integration with the DNC's polling place API, which meant they could type in their home address and we could show them the nearest polling places, help them choose one, and lock in a plan to vote on a particular day in a time frame in which it was open, and then have us give them a reminder on the day that they were intending to vote. Hugely successful.
Wow.
But we also were able to take people who told us that at that moment in time, they were still undecided. And through an integration with Help Scout, a platform they were using for volunteers to message to people, we were able to do a live handover to human volunteers to persuade them in this important decision. And we did that with over 3,000 voters. And as you know, this was although the gap in the popular vote was many millions, it was still decided by tens of thousands in a small number of states due to our quirky electoral college system.
Wow. Karthika?
Yeah, thanks, John, for that detailed kind of explanation. So I'm just wondering, so you're obviously monitoring what's happening with Facebook in Australia and things like that with the news and stuff like that. Does that affect your business model in any way in the future? Do you think that's going to make it easier for you, harder for you?
Mahi, do you want to take that one?
Maybe I'll jump into that. So, just so that we're all on the same page, both Google and Facebook are objecting to some legislation that basically says that if a social media company or a search company happens to publish through their access mechanism, that they should compensate the outlet or the organization that was creating that news content, which goes a little bit against, I think, the basic premise of the internet that even copyrighted material is made available through sort of a fair value exchange. However, that's monetized, that a lot of content is behind a paywall. If it's to be monetized through premium services, if not, it's monetized through advertising, and services like Google and Facebook surface up that content. A lot of it through the proactive placement of those content and those links in the various search engines or social media platforms. So in terms of how this affects us, we do work with a number of news organizations. So in India, for example, we have some of the biggest news organizations that use our platform to broadcast content and to re-engage that consumer. So you may see a piece of content on Facebook from, let's say, Z News, and you might click on it. And what we would try to do is to invite that consumer to enroll in a reoccurring relationship with that publisher to get alerts. Maybe it's breaking news alerts. Maybe it's something that's very specific to a topic or a section of the news that they're interested in. And we use a combination of messaging and social media to drive that re-engagement without having to pay for it, right? It's still monetized in the same ways that it was monetized before. So we think that that's an opportunity for a brand to control that relationship with the consumer. It's not a free-for-all, here's just the content and let's hope the consumer comes back to it. It's actually creating consumer loyalty between that publisher and that sort of brand of news. If they trust a Z Media to be an authentic purveyor of news, then they enter into a reoccurring relationship to consume that content in a way that the content is really personalized to the specific types of news they're looking for, down to potentially a specific news vertical. So we think that AI and personalization can go a long way in helping publishers attract audiences and to customize their news outlets that will meet the needs and expectations of the consumer in a more tailored fashion. And I think that using messaging, using social media tends to be a better way of trying to get those news out to that individual consumer, as opposed to like developing a mobile app, trying to get the user to download the app and that the user will proactively use that app every day. Something that shows up in your WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger stream from that brand that says, here's your breaking news today, or your personalized news today, seems to be a more attractive way of packaging up that content for an individual consumer.
Thanks, Mahi. John or Mahi, with the pandemic and people getting more aware of, touch screens and not wanting to touch things because of the spread of the virus and things like that, do you feel like, part of the success of Amplify AI is because it's conversational and people now want to do like more listening as opposed to more touching and going through things on a screen?
Actually, our
go ahead, John.
I was just say we're all in on messaging. So our modality of conversational AI is not voice, but it is in fact any form of chat, whether that's through Messenger or WhatsApp or Google Business Messages. We think people still are very much interacting with the screen that's their personal one. But yeah, there's obviously reluctance to be interacting with touching other people's screens.
So is voice sorry, Lavi, you had a question. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to add that we believe that delivering content is very familiar, that people are used to, is a better engagement. So your phone is sort of central to that. And it could be that an alert that shows up on a popular messaging service. You'll open it and you'll see the content that was personalized for you. We're also big believers of tap experiences versus type, because on a small screen it actually takes more effort to type on that screen. But if you give them lots of choices, like a news carousel, so they can easily kind of swipe and tap things that are interesting to them, they can scroll easily. That also accentuates consumption and loyalty.
Lavi, sorry, you seem to be on mute.
Sorry. All right, I'm not on mute anymore. Thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So if you guys switch gears a little bit. So we recently featured Elizabeth Adams on our program, and she spoke about the need to sort of build a more purposeful AI, AI that embodies our better natures by eschewing our darker, more violent tendencies, right? How do you ensure that, conversational AI is not misused or abused, given the power that obviously you've demonstrated through the success in the recent elections? And, what safeguards have you deployed at Amplify AI to sort of ensure that your technology is used to improve the human condition ethically, fairly, and justly? Anybody can answer that.
Yeah, I'll jump in first, and I'm sure John can add. I would say that the first thing we try to do is the AI systems respond to human interaction, right? We are, of course, we can help organize data and present it to the consumer, and we try to do that in a very even keel, low, low annoyance tonality to it. But a big issue that we really contend with is the power of social media to create disinformation and discontent. So there's a professor here at Stanford, Professor Hancock, who's written extensively about this notion of what he calls, I think that the term is now I'm blanking on the specific term.
Is it emotional contagion?
Yes, thank you, John. Emotional contagion. And what that means is that on social media, if you see something negative and you see multiple versions of that sort of negative sentiment, you're much more likely as a human being to pile on to that negativity. And the converse is also true, that if you tend to see things that are positive, have positive feelings towards that brand or that entity. So one of the things that we found in political is that if you can actually detect like organized disinformation, which quite often comes in the form of bots that attack social media accounts, that if you recognize that and you eliminate that negativity from the reaction pool to content, that you can actually significantly improve the sentiment around that brand and that message. And so we've taken that learnings and made it available to brands far and wide, which is what we call comment moderation, the ability to use machines to sort through what could be, a tsunami of comments and reactions on platforms like Facebook and Instagram, and be able to detect patterns of abuse, and to be able to not only hide those attempts at abusive behavior, but even identify and ban those accounts, so that you're detecting those attack points and you're permanently disabling them.
Okay, so maybe a follow-up question to that one. So if, I think I was asking, I like the fact that you have comment moderation, I guess, within the sort of existing client interchange. But maybe I'll direct this towards you, John. So if the Proud Boys came and said, hey, we loved your technology, can we use it? Do you have any sort of internal safeguards that say, no, I'm not doing business with you because, you're a recognized hate group, or how do you let sort of this very, very powerful technology, obviously demonstrated by the success you've had with it, from sort of getting misused by other parties, right? Is there anything internally that you've structured to say, I will only sell to certain people, or I won't support that, go find somebody else who would? Or, how do you make those kinds of, or do you make those kinds of distinctions because of the power of the technology? I'm just wondering. And the answer could be you don't know, but that's fine as well.
Well, it's certainly the case that we as an organization, do not want to be doers of evil. So we do reserve the right to refuse any customer. And I think you raise a very important and serious question. One of the things we try to do in the designs that we deploy is we are not in any way attempting to trick the human into believing that they're conversing with a human. And there are various techniques for how we try to, if it's for a political campaign, we talk about the candidate in the third person, not I, me. For example, with John Ossoff, we had the AI say, "I'm John's virtual organizer." So we're trying to set a playing field where the human is not from the get-go feeling or literally being tricked. So a lot of this is like best practices that we do in order to be ethical, moral, and legally compliant, especially given I do believe there will probably be more regulation of these kinds of interactions. And there is a remarkable power here, which I think, I wrote a Medium post about this called What I Learned from Conversations with Over 500,000 Trump Supporters. And, we didn't set out to probe the mind of Trump supporters. What happened is when we first deployed for Kamala Harris, we quickly discovered that fully 1/3 of the people who were engaging with her ads were people who had no intention of ever voting for her because they were loyal Trump supporters. So that was inefficient spend on the ad side. Mm-hmm. And so over time, we built up a custom audience of Trump supporters and used that for anti-targeting so that we could be reaching potential voters in support of Kamala rather than spending money to reach Trump supporters. That said, what we found is when we didn't have a Trump supporter conversational flow, that made angry folks angrier. And so we built up a set of questions, not because we had any particular thing in mind, but we just didn't want them to be angry. And over time, we ended up finding that folks across the full political spectrum were keen through the intimacy of Messenger to engage in a truthful and sharing way because they want it to be heard. So there's a real amazing power here. And I agree that we need to think carefully about how do we make sure that that power is not deployed in some way to nefarious ends by some other company.
Great answer.
I would just add to that to say that, we applaud the advances that have been made by platforms like Facebook and Twitter to be more explicit about what would cause an account to be suspended or blocked. I think the rule set is more more common sense driven today. And with our contractual framework with our customers is that they have to comply with all of those platform regulations. And if they do not comply and they abuse our platform, we reserve the right to turn them off. So that's a very explicit understanding that we have. We try not to create a company that is sort of single-sided or single issue driven. We think that there is a lot of room for a diversity of opinion and dialogue, but they have to conform to the platform terms of use.
Great. Kartika?
Yeah, so John, you'd recently, or maybe not recently, a couple of months ago, written a blog post about how you reached, I think, 10 billion engagements and over 500 million people with Amplify AI. So to that point, so you've used Amplify AI to enact change at like a scale that, like we've seen in the last US election, which marketers would like to call movement marketing. So do you see Amplify AI as an enabler or a tool for, organizations, companies, or individuals that are looking to, enact good or change in the world through movement marketing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There is an enormous appetite in the world for people to engage in a positive way to enact change that makes the world better. And any organization that is able to tap into that and is going to see really high engagement on their social channels, and will struggle to figure out how to take that engagement and make it into something of value. And that's where we come in. Conversational AI can turn engagement into gold, whether that is folks volunteering or folks donating, signing petitions, calling their elected representatives. It really is a force multiplier that every change agent should be looking at.
Thanks, John. So John or Mahi, I mean, we recently spoke to the Chief Movement Officer of Amnesty International, and they're now running this new movement around banning the scan, the facial recognition stuff. So I'm interested to find out: is there a movement marketing playbook? And if there were, what chapter would Conversational AI or Amplify AI be in that book, and why?
Well, maybe I'll take it from the perspective of there's a lot of similarity between what movement marketing is trying to achieve and what a political campaign is trying to achieve, because it's a combination of digital engagement at massive scale. It's tapping into positive emotions to affect change. It's mobilizing to take actions, and all of that is amplified by being able to have an intimate one-to-one long-term conversational relationship between the entity and any one person. And for any organization that is able to have a large number of people interacting with it, this is the game changer. And it doesn't matter whether it's happening through Messenger and Facebook, or whether it's happening through SMS or WhatsApp or web chat. All of these conversational surfaces are an opportunity to use conversational AI to move folks up the ladder of engagement to affect positive change.
Wow.
So if the civil rights movement, if Martin Luther King was alive today and the civil rights movement is happening now, how would you see Amplify AI playing a role?
Well, I mean, there's nothing better than the 1-2 punch of a great mission and people who can articulate the vision of the mission and some way to effectively organize human activity at scale. Now, what we saw in the civil rights movement in the United States, that all happened, and it happened without the internet, and it happened, with phones and door to door. But what Mahi and I and Amplify.ai we're so proud to have demonstrated over the course of 2019 and 2020 and even a little bit of 2021 in the US political system is to be able to organize human activity to affect change at a scale that was previously inconceivable without physically going to large-scale events, which became impossible in the pandemic. COVID-19 fundamentally changed how campaigning, how organizing humans to make change could happen at scale. And so it's a fundamentally different way about engaging with people in a way that works for them and works for the greater good.
So, I mean, that you bring up a really interesting point there, and I'm wondering whether you are at liberty to comment on this or not. But it seems that the Trump campaign, was focused on mega rallies, all these people together in a physical location, and they seem to have essentially read the technical tea leaves incorrectly, among all other things. Well, okay, that's a separate conversation. But they did not adjust their campaign to the realities of the pandemic, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you guys went
absolutely.
with Conversational AI, and you reached millions of people, and they were all about the show of having people in a location and doing the rah-rah, and obviously that backfired spectacularly.
And they also built a campaign app, which they literally referred to internally and publicly as the Death Star.
Oh my God.
And to Mahi's earlier point, like, it's 2021. It's not about getting people to download your insurance company app, your banking app, your political campaign app. Like, people don't want to download 50 more apps. They want to have self-service digital interaction that works for them in a convenient and instantaneous way. And that's what is possible through messaging and conversational AI.
Wonderful. So if you were to sort of take this prognostication a little bit further, Karthika, did you have a follow-up question? You were.
Oh, no, please go ahead. I do have a question, but we can come back.
Okay, all right. So for both of you, so if you were to sort of imagine yourself 5 years from today, right? Where do you think conversational AI? I mean, how dramatically changed would conversational AI be, or Amplify AI for that matter? What would it look like, sound like, feel like to us, say, 5 years from today?
I'll take a quick stab at that. So one of the big differences, I would say, we employ versus traditional list. So whether it's political or government-driven or brand-driven, the playbook has been, let's give us your email address and we'll keep you updated about our products or our mission or our vision or what have you. The problem is email is a store and forward. It's an antiquated messaging system that has been grossly abused. So, most of us see more spam in a day than useful correspondence. And if we don't feel a particular allegiance to a brand or an organization, we're much more likely to ignore that piece of information. But if you as an organization have earned the right to communicate with me through an intimate messaging channel, and that SMS, or it could be other messaging platforms, then it's up and it says that you're Amnesty International, and I feel akin to Amnesty International. I will read that message if there's a call to action, I'm much more likely to consider providing that action than if it was sent to me in an impersonal email campaign. The second, and I think more important part about it, and this is where AI and machine learning come in, is based on those patterns of interaction. Those interactions become much personalized, graphically tuned. It's issue driven. So we're finding those pathways that will drive better engagement because it's more meaningful to that individual, even though Amnesty International is a truly international organization that is trying to reach billions of people around the planet. So it's about much more data-driven about listening, about being much more data-driven about personalizing that engagement, making it personal and meaningful and rewarding. Because ultimately, if it's not rewarding, we'll eventually tune out. So I think, with the power of machine learning, you can do that without throwing a lot of humans at that problem and have them sort of sort through all this data and try to do it manually.
So do you feel that, in addition to sort of text or typing or touching, as you suggested, that people will also just be speaking through their AIs like Alexa or Google Assistant or Siri or something like that as well, and then interfacing with an AI similar to yours in the background?
Different what the input
Sorry, I think
method
you're
or
on mute.
output method might be.
Okay.
I'm not. It might be the stream. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I was just saying that we're largely indifferent to the input or output method because it all essentially gets turned into strings by the time our processor gets involved, whether it's a spoken word or read or typed or said. And we think that the emergence of augmented reality will make the camera even more interactive and more data-driven. Instead of it just being like a 2D picture, you'll be able to tell that I'm in my home or I'm in a particular location, and that will provide more signals about me and my presence. So yeah, we think a data-rich, interactive environment, there's a lot that we can do with all the great technologies, modalities that present themselves in digital form.
Cool. Karthika?
It really, the notion of conversational marketing has been around for a long time. It really is a kind of a holy grail. But it is a major game changer. Like right now, the world is largely set up for broadcast, this one thing to many people. And that's in the next 5 years, that gets completely turned over, because what we've shown is that people are very willing to share a bit about what they really care about in order to get a better, more personalized experience through conversational engagement with a brand or a movement organization or a political campaign. People want to be heard. They have opinions. They're willing to share them. And if that creates for a truly better experience, it also means that the touch point frequency can be higher. So, for example, right now, one of the most important tools in the political space has been texting, broadcast SMS. It really works, but it works because you send the same message to a very large number of people and a small fraction of them will click and donate. We can completely transform that in the next 5 years by understanding the recipient, the voter, better, and delivering the right message to the right person at the right time. And that will work in commercial, it will work in political. It's it's a really different way of thinking about digital engagement. And to Mahi's point that we're essentially agnostic as to whether it is messaging or voice. Before I joined Amplify.ai, my last startup was doing virtual reality stuff a little earlier than the mainstream market, but we're seeing now this year that VR is mainstreaming. 5 years from now, it will be mainstream. And how brands communicate with people through virtual reality will have at its center this conversational AI personalization approach. And so that's really kind of that's probably the biggest mind blower that'll happen in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit excited by everything John's saying, because this is a bunch of stuff that I've been saying for a while now. But obviously, John, as you know, the advent of social media has led to this whole generation of, shall we call, spray and pray marketers who still exist. Just, to Mahi's point as well, just list building, build as big a list as possible and basically spray and pray, as opposed to personalization and stuff like that. So given that kind of context, and also, the increasingly competitive kind of market space that, you're in, what is Amplify AI's niche? Are you planning to niche down? And, what is it that you offer that you think is unique and different for a customer to, work with Amplify AI?
Was that
I'll take a quick stab.
Yeah, Mahi, go first.
I would just say that the scale of mechanization with AI does have a threshold that you need mechanization. If you're a mom and pop store that gets a dozen interactions a day, you don't need a machine with that. But we focus on those organizations that are seeing thousands of interactions, and it would be quite expensive to have humans sort through all of those. And just it's not just the inefficiency; it's actually the diversity that any human pool introduces to customer engagement. That if you take a pool, there have been studies done that when you exceed like 100 people in a call center, your quality of responses actually go down, because it's so much less consistent than if you had 100. So scale matters. So we do focus our solution on being delivered to people that are seeing thousands of interactions on a daily basis. But to talk a little bit about the future and how our market is evolving, we are seeing brands really embrace the notion of social influencers to help represent their brand in the digital world, and assist in its communication, but envelope all the influencers that are representing that brand, measuring that, understanding the tonality of those interactions, the implications to brand safety with those interactions, really make that stronger. And they can go and enlist these influencers in a much more data-driven way than just saying, oh, this person has 1 million followers, so let's pay them to write a post about my product.
Karthika? You're on mute, I think.
Sorry, my bad. It's interesting what Mahi is saying, because I think it was in 2017 when Reid Hoffman came on the Masters of Scale podcast and said, in order to scale, you have to do things that don't scale at the beginning. But based now 3-4 years down the line, what you guys are saying is you can do things, you can personalize at scale, basically. You know, in order to scale, because it's essentially the antithesis of what he was saying, which is he said, in order to scale, you know, you have to do things that don't scale. But what you're saying is, in order to scale, the things that don't scale, we can help you scale.
I would agree with that, but I would add that I think Reid is right. And an example there is something of my lived experience, which is in our efforts in the US political market, I led the design of the conversational UX, and I monitored personally many thousands of conversations, because essentially what we're talking about here, the bleeding edge of natural language processing. I mean, the significance of our announcement of 10 billion digital engagements across 500 million people around the world, like, we solved a chicken and egg problem, because if your NLP is not good enough, you won't get to billions of engagements. And if you get to billions of engagements, conversational engagements, you have a conversational data set on which you can do machine learning and get better and better. And so that tricky part of that is some humans need to spend a ridiculous amount of time looking at actual conversations between humans and AI in order to figure out where's the lever to improve this and make that improvement happen on a week over week escalating basis.
Interesting point. Lavi, I know you have something to ask. Sorry, you're on mute, Lavi.
I think you have a minute left, and so let me ask a question. So, if somebody, people listening in audience are, very intrigued about what you do, and say, hey, this is an opportunity for us to sort of get ahead and use AI technology that's mature. And I know that if you just Google conversational AI, you're going to get a lot of companies sort of claiming to do various things. So what kind of so if you were to narrow it down and say, okay, the kind of customers that should be calling us are, and if you can answer that question, John, and say, like, there would be these companies with this kind of turnover or this number of employees, this kind of problem, that's who should be contacting us. That would be helpful.
Yeah, the way I think about it is, it's whether the entity is a consumer brand or a political campaign or a government. One of the most important attributes to make this a high return on investment deployment would be that there is today high engagement, especially if it's in the form of comments, whether the comments are on Facebook or on Instagram. Those are where we can really move the needle big time right out the gate.
Okay. So a high level of engagement on social media platforms around whatever your thing is, whether it's a brand or a movement or a person or whatever it is, that's where you can make a significant impact in terms of the outcomes and in the levels of engagement and call to actions and all of that stuff. I would assume that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But also, what we're now seeing is with the tools that Google has exposed in search, we can now create that conversational experience right from a search result. And the same thing that we've been able to deliver in social media and on websites, we can now deliver within a search experience. And that's practically every enterprise today invests in search technology and search-based customer engagement, and our tool set works very well in that modality as well.
And you did mention, Mahi, that you had a number of news organizations customers. Did I hear correctly?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so that would be a potential source or a type of customer as well. Somebody who wants to create a personalized experience in terms of content, engages with you to then sort of, comb their own resources or the internet to provide that content to them in a personalized manner. Did I hear that correctly then?
Exactly.
Okay. All right, Karthika, any final comments or questions from anybody?
No, I just had one question. So if somebody, let's say X, who meets all of these criteria, comes and says, I want to build a movement around something. So right now, from my understanding of it, because you've solved the chicken and egg problem of having the data sets and understanding the conversations, if a human is able to identify and go through it, you're sort of, how long does that take? Like with the existing data sets that you have, if somebody comes and says, I want to build a movement around, I don't know, the ethics of AI, how long does that process take for them to hit the go button?
It can literally be hours, because it's as easy as using our conversational builder, drag and drop, and deploying that solution, and then getting interactions and reacting to it. Most people have a pretty good idea of the kind of engagements they want to drive, whether it's acquisition or issue-based engagement. So it's very easy to put that into the form of a conversational flow or a conversational tree. And it's one of these investments that, you can refine it as things develop, and the insights you'll get are, they're priceless.
So, okay, I'm going to ask another sort of a salesy question from John, maybe. So, John, if you were to say, if you would advise a customer looking to sort of deploy conversational AI, what are the sort of 2-3 things they need to sort of ask the vendor, such as yourself, to make sure that you're a competent or useful vendor for them? I mean, what are the 3 or 4, 5 questions you would recommend they ask any vendor in the space to verify their credentialing? Because I know there's a lot of sort of buzz around. There's a lot of players out there. And so how do you sort of, how do you figure out which one is the right one beyond sort of the marketing, obviously, on the respective websites?
I think that's a great question. Certainly where the rubber meets the road is there are a lot of folks out there who provide simple tap-based chatbots. But if the platform is not able to handle typed responses from humans who really want to engage, which is what you will have in any deployment. So you need, if you're trying to find a vendor for doing personalized conversational AI engagement, no matter what goal you have in mind, you need to understand how good is the NLP. And one actual, if you want a number, you could ask, what is the average number of messages per session that you typically are seeing? Because for most simple chatbots, it's 2, 3, 4 messages, interactions. We're able to do in-depth, purpose-driven conversational engagement that goes to 20 to 25 messages per session with almost no drop-off. And I would also ask if you, as you should, provide an automated response whenever anyone asks, are you a bot? Are you software? Are you human? Which happens. The question would be, how frequently does that get asked?
And the answer to that question will indicate what? Are you a bot? Are you a human?
If it's a relatively unsophisticated platform, that question will get asked a lot, and the number of messages per conversation will be fairly low.
Okay. So obviously, on both these questions, you're hoping the vendor will give you a truthful answer in response.
Well,
Yeah. Okay.
That's a more philosophical question.
Okay. Well, thank you, both of you, for
obviously, the other way I would approach it is say, give me a link.
Okay.
To actually experience your best. I mean, it's super easy to determine by going through a conversational flow whether it works or not. I mean, I gave you this rosy picture of what could be in 5 years. The truth of the matter is today, if you go to any of your favorite brands on Facebook and look, you'll probably see a send message button. Hit it, pose a question, and see what happens. It will disappoint you in almost all cases. So this is such a huge market opportunity, because right now some of the best consumer brands in the world have not realized that their consumers, their customers, their prospects want to be heard, want to engage, and want to have a meaningful, convenient interaction that is better than calling them on the phone, that's better than walking into their store, better than being put on hold. It's just like marketing is changing right now. And there's an opportunity for the best CMOs of consumer brands to turn their brands into conversational brands.
Thank you. That's spot on. And I think if anybody wants to read the latest McKinsey report, says that because of the pandemic, we are now in year 2024 in terms of digitalization and not in 2021. So, we sort of leapfrogged all the way into the future. And technologies like yours is going to make a hell of a difference to the experience. And that's why we wanted to have you on our show. We are focusing this year on AI as sort of an instrument of change for the positive and the good. And we are advocating to people who listen to our program or view our program to actually embrace AI, because we believe there has to be some kind of a force multiplier required for us to sort of stop this, what we are calling the sort of the extinction clock from running out. We think it's 60 seconds from extinction, and we need to do quantitatively and qualitatively different things to improve the human condition, and AI is a great tool to do that. And we believe that companies such as yours are positioned very well to help do that. So thank you very much for spending your evening, late evening in California with us. So thanks again, Mahi and John. All the very best. Keep us posted. We're happy to sort of have you back on the show if you have any sort of new news or new technology to share with us.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Take care. Good night.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Okay, bye.